we are going to be talking about Joseph tonight, not Jophus.
Well, yeah, she's gonna start saying Jophus
I'm
because
going
I'm
to.
just told her a story. But anyway,
But this is a story. Joseph's story is a picture of God's providence, and it's a story of abandonment, and it's a story of restoration. And so I was watching Max Lucado, his sermon on Joseph, and he said, God took him from the pit to prison to the palace.
yeah. Oh, that's
And that's
good.
amazing.
That's
Yeah.
good.
And so with God's help, his story just tells us that we're able to get through anything, and God's with us and never leaves us and doesn't forsake us. And so um, Israel had Joseph was one of 12 sons by Israel, which originally was Jacob,
Hmm.
and so his brothers. Joseph was favored by his dad.
Yes,
This is
I mean, he was.
Yeah.
I gotta give
He
his
was the
brothers
favorite
some.
kid. He could have worn the T-shirt.
He could have, like, everybody else was the black sheep. He was the golden child
Yeah,
because it was from his most beloved wife, and
yeah,
so much later on in life and things. But I mean, I can see the jealousy big time.
yeah. And so his father gave him this coat of many
Hmm.
colors. So that was something else that kind of made his brothers dislike him.
Yeah.
Um, so Joseph, he was about 17 years old when all of this
Hmm.
happened, and so he shared a dream with his brothers, and this dream,
It's just like rubbing it in. Just,
yeah.
I'm your favorite, and I also got a dream from God
Mhm.
that.
But this dream was like, he was telling them that he would be over them one day. And so that didn't go over very
No,
well.
especially he's the younger brother,
Yeah.
and age meant a big huge deal. You got, if you were the firstborn, you got so much, and the second, I mean, so it was a big deal of your
But he
birth order.
wasn't the youngest, right?
No,
There was one after him,
Benjamin, and he was also his
a
wife.
favorite.
Yeah, favorite. Well, not the favorite, but just from the favorite wife. So it was
Gotcha.
Joseph and Benjamin of the same mom, and the rest of them had different mom,
Okay.
which is the whole problem. I mean, you got two baby mamas, there's going to be strife. So
Did
it's
he
weird.
only have two
I
wives?
don't know. I
Okay.
just know of just of those two.
So there was a second dream, and Joseph told them all and told his father about the dream. And um, this was basically telling them that they would all bow down to him again. And his
Yeah.
father didn't really like that idea.
Yeah.
And so he sent him off to his brothers in the field. And when Joseph was on his way, his brothers saw him coming and they were plotting against him, plotting to kill him.
Yeah.
And so they were going to throw him into a pit.
Hmm.
And
And I don't think that I think his father trusted him more too, because I think, like, with money situations, at least this is how it was in the movie I watched on Prime today. It was Jo, Joseph and
Jophus,
Jophus and his brethren, and so his brethren. So anyway, he you can watch that. It's like old school, and but it really depicts characters really well, like the old movies. But if you can get through it, but I thought it was great. Some of it was a little corny, but you just laughed at it. Like Potiphar was like the best casted person there, but um it was like the brothers stole off the dad, like, so he really didn't trust the brothers as much as he did with Joseph. So
so they plotted, they were going to throw him into a pit, kill him, and um, tell his father. Well, they ended up saying
that the
Reuben
wolves, yeah.
came and said that no, let's not kill him. They were going to throw him into the pit. So Reuben kind of saved him from
Yeah.
being killed. But they were going to they put blood on the
The
cloak or
Coke, yeah.
whatever and took it back to their dad and told him that he had been killed and was devoured by a wild beast.
I mean, that's some. They were ruthless. I mean, seriously. But they did in the end regret doing that or felt bad for it or whatever. But the whole story of Joseph just shows me that, like, we think about our times of when we go through horrible times, or I mean, he was put in prison. He was sold to slavery. I mean,
By his family.
yes, and
Yeah.
then Potiphar's wife lied and said that, she tried to come on to him and he never would, and so she lied and had him put him in prison, and just all this stuff happened to him, but it was still God's plan. And so I think sometimes we don't realize that even in the bad things that we go through, everything is part of God's plan. Because if he wouldn't have went into prison and he wouldn't have went to slavery, he would have never been in the position to interpret the dreams for
Mhm.
Pharaoh. And it just, God has everything worked out, and we worry, we worry all the time about the low points of our life, and we don't realize that God is actually moving us. We were just sitting here talking about, when God wants to move you, He will put you in situations, or He'll, if He wouldn't have been sold into slavery, then He would have never ended up in that position. But also, if God needs to move you in a position that you're in your life, He's going to make things not good, and you're not going to be happy, and you're going to be unsettled, and that's how He uproots you and moves you to where He needs you to be.
Mhm.
Right?
Right?
All right.
All right.
Yeah, that's a nudge, a Christy nudge. And even in our lives, we have decisions that we are going through, like when my husband and I moved churches. We loved our church, and we had been there a long time. Our kids grew up in the youth ministry, and so we were comfortable and we loved the people there. But there was something that was missing. And a lot of people are like, you hang in with your church, you hang in with your church. That's what people say. But also, you have to understand that God has a purpose for your move, to use you or to grow you or whatever. So, it's like a double, you have to look on both sides. Like, if God is needing you to be somewhere so He can put you in a position like a job, you know, um, He may have a CEO position that He needs for you to be in, and so He's going to make this other job horrible to where
Mhm.
you'll move and look for a different job. And so He moves even in the bad situations in our life.
And in those bad situations, there are times where he helps you land on your feet
That's
in
right.
those bad
That's right.
situations. And that's what he did with Joseph.
Yep.
And so he was sold into slavery to the Egyptians. So this is where he's sold to Potiphar, the Pharaoh's chief um, guard or
Yeah.
bodyguard or whatever. So Joseph lands on his feet here. He becomes the chief servant of Potiphar, and then Potiphar's wife. That's when she tries to seduce him, and he rejects her, and then
Hmm.
she takes his cloak and then uses that to tell her husband Potiphar that he tried to make a
Rape.
sport
Hmm.
of her.
Yeah.
That
Yep.
was what it
He
said.
attempted to rape
Yeah.
her, and that was, not true. So, um, even when people lie on you, I mean, this really has spoke to me so much on everything. Because I mean, you think of, like, when somebody wrongs you, or God uses every part of your life for His plan. And so, I think that's why God tells us that we should be thankful in all seasons of our life, and trust the Lord. I think a lot of times we are so wrapped up thinking we have control of our life. I mean, people in the Bible depended on God for everything. They had a faith about them in the Old Testament, that they really trusted the Lord. And Joseph was like that. I mean, he just knew that everything good. Even when he interpreted the dream, and told
The cupbearer.
yes, that he was going to go back into, Pharaoh's, he would work in there again. um he's getting ready to be killed, and he's not. And
Mm,
so, at that moment, that to me is just, he was able to interpret dreams, which those dreams, I mean, were crazy.
mm.
Like, I'm thinking, I've never had a dream about birds eating this, but my dreams are crazy. But, like, to be able to interpret that stuff, um
Was from God.
yes, and that increased his faith.
Hmm.
So it's just like every day he relied on the Lord to lead his steps. And I fall so short with that. I feel like, I trust myself first. And then when I get maybe too in too deep with my decisions or whatever, then I go to the Lord instead of just relying on Him for everything. For whatever I'm in, I'm in. So we don't like to be in the hot seat. We don't like to be,
Not at
um,
all.
yeah, because we get scared and think,
Has he forgotten me?
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
that He's forsaken us, or He's left us, or whatever. And so that's why it's so important to think about that there is nothing we can do to change His plans that He has for our life, our purpose. So.
So he ends up interpreting the dream for the cupbearer and for the chief baker. And so the cupbearer's dream, he was going to be saved and he would be put back in his rightful place with Potiphar. And then the chief baker, he would be killed. And so this comes to pass. But Joseph had asked the cupbearer, "Remember me when you're back,
Yeah,
when you're put back in place." And the cupbearer, when he was put back in place, forgot all about
yeah.
him. And so Joseph still was standing firm.
Hmm.
He didn't have a bad attitude.
That's
It was
right.
like, you know,
He was a slave, and he was grateful, and he was the best slave he could be.
hmm
That's the crazy thing about it. No matter what we are in our life, we're supposed to be that because that's how you get a foothold to get to the next level. You may have to go in at the bottom like a slave, but then you end up at the very tip top. So
so finally the cupbearer, he remembers the Potiphar was needing, was it Potiphar?
no, it was the Pharaoh.
The
He had a
Pharaoh
vision. Yeah.
wanted his dream interpreted. And so the cupbearer remembers Joseph and brings him back in, and
Hmm.
Joseph's able to interpret that dream. And so then Pharaoh makes
Him the
Joseph in
main. Yep,
charge.
that's right. Because there's a great famine that's coming. There'll be 7 years of plentiful food and stuff, and then it will be followed by 7 years of famine. And so somebody was going to need to prepare and prep,
Mm-hmm.
and all this stuff. And so um, because he was the other people that were supposedly dream interpreters couldn't interpret his dream, and so when he like went up the other guy, like he was like, I don't know what this dream means, and so but Joseph did, and so because he knew that, um, that's why he put him in charge. So
So, even through all this, and even through the things that we go through, God is always there.
that's
Um,
right.
God provides, He directs, He manages, and He sustains everything.
Hmm.
Um,
And you would think he would be bitter, or he would, because I mean his brothers sold him to slavery, but it did not affect his heart.
he
I don't
could have
know.
just kept going over and over again.
Hmm.
This is not the way my life was
That's
supposed
right.
to be, just woe is me. But instead, He turned everything around.
That's right.
So Hebrews 1:3 says, "The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful words. After he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of majesty in heaven." So Jesus sustains. He will make sure it reaches its intended destination. And so one of the words that I looked up, and it's in Hebrew. So the word is intend, but in Hebrew it means to weave. And so God
Weaves.
weaves
He does. Yeah.
everything
That's
together
right.
for His good.
That's the verse that says that when he starts a good work, he'll finish it. Those are the things that you have to remind yourself, and you see how God is faithful in the Old Testament with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, everybody, that no matter what they did or what they didn't do or how bad their life was or where they were sold or if they were a slave, God's plan always happened. And nobody on earth has the power to mess God's plan up. And that's in our life as well. So, you have to remember that when you think you've sinned too much or you've gone too far back or whatever, that you have to remind yourself of Joseph, where he came from. I mean, what was it you said again? He went from,
From the pit to the prison to the
yes,
palace.
that's
Yeah.
good. And so, and I mean, that is, I think we're all in a pit,
hmm
and we're all prisoners of our sin, and God has a purpose. And so once you are able to come into who God has created you to be, then there's life of abundance. And so that's kind of your palace. So,
Genesis 50:20 says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good
that's right.
to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." And so he was talking about how he was put in charge, and he saved the nations by preparing and getting them ready for the famine.
That's right.
And so this is the point where his brothers, it's
Yeah.
famine time.
Yes.
His
Everybody's
brothers,
hungry.
yeah, his brothers come to him asking him for food. And so this is when Joseph realizes that's who they are.
Yep, and they
But
have
they
no,
don't.
yep,
Yeah.
they don't know. And they came without Benjamin because Benjamin stayed back with his dad because he had already lost Joseph and he couldn't bear to lose his other son by his most favored wife. And so he held Benjamin back, and they went looking for food.
And so now their future was in his hands,
That's right.
just like, what they had done to him by selling him into slavery and ruining the
And I
rest of
think
his
most
life.
people would have been like, remember what you did to me?
Hmm.
But
So he thought maybe that he had ruined his life, but God saved him,
mhm.
and he landed on his feet at each interval of his life.
And once
Um,
again, his brothers were blessed because they were descendants
mhm.
of Abraham. Even they went through all that and they did that. In the very end, it's a happy ending story because his brother ends up taking him back in. But that also is the promise that God made to Abraham that his descendants, so.
They intended heartache, hurt, abandonment, and shedding of blood and destroying their family, but God is always sovereign.
Mhm.
He rewove their intention to good. And so um, God gets his people through things. It may not be easy. That's what we were just
Yeah.
talking about a little bit ago. He doesn't get us around it or over it. He gets us
He gets
through
us through it. That's right. And I think a lot of times we have a misrepresentation of the Lord. We cry out to the Lord and we're like, Lord, help my marriage. And we expect him to go poof. Or we say, Lord, give me patience. And we expect him to go poof. Or we say, Lord, give us, help us to love. Instead, what the Lord does is he brings unlovable people into your life. And he gives you situations that are full of chaos to help you learn patience. I mean, it's through everything that the Lord
Mhm.
teaches you and delivers you from your sin and everything. And so it's never he's not a magician to where he makes things go away. He can heal you, but he would rather show you that he can do what you can't. That's what he's in the business of. He wants you to be at the end of your rope with no other move, and then he loves to come in and save the day. That's God. That's his characteristic. He loves to do that because then he gets the glory, because that's what it's all about. God getting the glory, not about you getting more patience or having more love. It's about God gets the glory.
Mhm.
And so you literally have to be at rock bottom before he gives you that way.
Well, Job 34:14 through 15 says, if it were his intention and he withdrew his spirit and breath, all humanity would perish together and mankind would return to dust. So God maintains everything because without God, there wouldn't be order.
That's right. And there is order. There is definitely order. Joseph's story also presents amazing insight into how God's sovereignty works to overcome evil. Just like what you said, what you meant to destroy me,
Mm-hmm.
the Lord uses for my good. And so, and for those, that's how he works. After all of Joseph's ordeals, he was able to see God's hand at work. As he revealed his identity to his brothers, Joseph spoke of their sin this way: do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourself for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. It was not you who sent me here, but God. And so he kind of takes the guilt off of his brothers and puts it in the right place of that the Lord, they were just following out what the Lord had planned for him. Later, Joseph again reassured his brothers, offering of forgiveness, saying, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. Man's most wicked intentions can never thwart the perfect plan of God. And so I just feel like we just have to keep reminding ourselves when we're in, and it's the same with when you think that like Satan has got his hands on you. Satan does want to destroy you. He does want to he hates you. But you have to understand that sometimes it's through Satan's um, tricks and snares that encamp you or enslave you that's how the Lord delivers you. And so being delivered is the best thing ever, because once you've been delivered or saved, um, you have purpose. And I think people who haven't really surrendered their life or their sin to God and to be delivered from sin, um, they don't experience that, and so they just think that they're just nobody, like they don't have a purpose. I love stories like this where
I do.
God
I loved
comes,
reading it
yes,
and
comes
studying
in
it.
and saves the day, and
Ephesians 1 11 through 12. In him we were also chosen, having been predestined according to the plan of him who works out everything in conformity with the purpose of his will. Thank
yep,
the Lord.
that's right, that's right. And so from this, you know, I don't know if like I've really been stuck on are we going to go forward with um, going into the tribes because each one of those sons will be a tribe. When you hear the 12 tribes, it's the these men that sold Joseph into slavery. These men are the men that remember when Peter was standing at Pentecost and he was speaking out in everyone's language. It was these tribes are named after these men. And so when you hear the 12 tribes, you're hearing the
Their names.
yes, the names of Joseph's brothers who sold him into slavery. And I was reading after we got off of podcast last week that Dan doesn't get to participate
Mm-hmm.
in the tribulation where the 144,000 Jewish men are going to come and hold the biggest revival. There'll be 12,000 from each tribe except Dan. And I was trying to read about it and there's really not anything that's said as to why.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really neat to see that even though that there's still stuff coming that takes us back to Joseph, and it's just really neat. So I'm hoping that part of me wants to study it, but some of this is hard.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. Like when you're in these battles, because like they just dominate one another. They take over this kingdom, and God gives them kings because they want a king to rule. And so I don't know how we'll do that. We'll kind of decide. But I mean, it's been great studying, kind of figuring out what all's going on over in Israel and with Gaza and all of that. I don't know. I'm sure all of you all watched TikTok or Instagram or some form of it and have seen these horrible pictures of these children. And but you have to understand. And I did mess up last week. I said Psalms 91. I was meaning 83 when it said that we would see things, but it wouldn't come to us. We'd see things with our eyes. I said 91 instead of 83. But it's just neat to know that all this was where it all starts, and it's almost like we're living out the last part of the days. I've heard a lot of people say, that they truly believe that, you know, this is it.
Every preacher that I listen to, that's what they're
Yep,
preaching.
yep. And so hopefully your pastor is, and but it's just so exciting to know the beginning of where all this started. And I did go back and look up a little bit about Abraham's father, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just neat to know where everything was and what and that it all comes from Noah and it all comes from Genesis, and so it's just a continuance. People say that our world is billions of years old, but it's not. It's about 6,000 years old, and from the beginning of creation. So every 1,000 years is kind of a like Abraham was in the first thousand. Then I mean, there's a timeline of all this, and so it's this generation that goes all the way down to Jesus. Every one of these people are Jesus's lineage.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the line of God's chosen people. That's why He chose these people, and there's a lineage that follows all the way down through from Adam and ends at Jesus, and it's I mean traceable.
Wouldn't it be neat to know where that lineage is right now?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, really,
Yeah.
really. You hear things that people are looking for, you know, um, because they do those ancestry
Mm-hmm.
things like that. That people are really the reason they started that, or they do the swabs or whatever because they're looking for a certain type. But I don't know, I don't know. But the Jewish people, they were God's chosen people, and it was because they needed to point to Jesus. It's all about Jesus. So. And this is not Joseph. This is not Jesus's father.
Right.
This is way before. So, but yeah, I enjoyed studying all of the new people, and so I think our next podcast is, and we're coming into the holidays, and so tonight we're actually going to record two. We're going to go back to talking about the desires of the flesh. I feel like that is most needed because um, you're not ever going to be able to overcome anything in your life unless you know what's inside of you, what is desired by your flesh. And so that's what we're going to talk about on the next podcast. And we may come back to this, but I think we're going to kind of go forward with and as the war progresses or whatever it happens, we may visit this again. But just understand that this is all biblical and there's a purpose for it all. And so, yeah. Do you have anything else you want to share about Jophus?
Jophus was it?
That's what I used to say when I was young, Jophus and Mary. So, yeah, I thought for sure that I was going to say it one time or whatever. So, all right, we will see you next week.